Thank you, Mr. Howell, for a wonderful introduction. I also would like to extend a warm invitation to everyone who's here tonight. Thank you for joining us. Without further ado, we'd like to welcome the first presenter from the Affirming side, Mr. Alex Dillon. You want to say something?
Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. The debate motion in this House believes that American capitalism undermines the Catholic view of society as it is being brought up. So the first thing we must distinguish is, does anyone here contend that we do live in a Catholic society here today in the United States of America? Do we contend that? No, we do not live in a Catholic society where abortion is rampant, our desires are expanded, where evils abound in individuals and systematically as well. We do not live in a Catholic society. So why should we think that our economic system is set up in a Catholic way, according to a Catholic view of society? Right away, it undermines it in not being Catholic, the American capitalist style. So what are we debating on tonight? Capitalism. I'd like to say that the capitalist-socialist dichotomy that's set up is a false dichotomy. This isn't a Trump v. Bernie debate. This is not I'm advocating for socialism because I'm on this side. This isn't capitalism, it's not socialism, it's Catholicism, which we're all arguing for. The capitalist system exists on this spectrum along with socialism that assumes that the individual is the basis of society. It's not the family, it's not the church, and all these other things. The individual is the end. And what does capitalism do? But it sets out the guidelines of what our wealth is to be used for. The guideline for capitalism is in the name. It's the accumulation of capital for the sake of producing more capital, along with having individual fulfillment as being the American dream, as the American part of this. This is a view which secularizes wealth. It says that wealth and economics is something it's different than Christ and the church. It's set aside, right? The first Christians to secularize wealth were Ananias and Sapphira. They were the ones to take their wealth and say, this belongs to me alone. This does not belong to ultimate ends. So what is the ultimate end of man according to the church? It's eternal salvation, union with Christ in heaven, and living out the Catholic life here on earth. So according to that system of economics, that is not what capitalism argues. Capitalism says we are individuals, we necessarily act in our self-interest, and that we need the state to give us certain laws and legislation to make sure that the market economy can continue, that competition can continue. And in fact, we're always going to act in our self-interest. We're going to try and accumulate the most capital for ourselves, and the state should try and regulate that. I had a neighbor about a month ago tell me a story about his business that he worked at for 15 years. It was helping a pharmaceutical company. And he was working the advertising part of it. He took the company from a $100 million a year company to a $400 million a year company in 1 year. He had this fantastic marketing campaign. He had a team of 10 people. And he was supposed to be getting a percentage of that by a check of $1 million in mid-June. And this was right before June. It was the day before he was going to get paid. He goes to his office. There's a security guard outside of the office with a box. He said, hey, do you know Rob? He's like, yeah, I know Rob. It was Rob speaking. And he said, oh, good. Where should I put his box? He's out of here. The day before he was going to get his $1 million check, they fired him. Okay? What recourse does Rob have? Legal. The capitalistic system says you have legal recourse to fight against these, it's all on a contractual basis. It's not based on the person, it's based on contract. So we went back into his contract. They legally were allowed to fire him on the last day before they gave him the check. Now, when any of us here argue that the Catholic system would in any way condone this, the capitalistic system says nothing of that. It says, oh, you don't have a legal case? There is no case. And then you appeal to morality, right? So the person who was over him that made the decision, he said they would do Bible studies together, and he was a good Christian and all this stuff. But what conquers in capitalism, in this conception? The individual fulfillment of desire. I could pocket that check and then use it either for the accumulation of more capital or take it out and buy a yacht. The capitalistic system, that is what it is. That's the ultimate end. The Catholic view of it is that ultimate end is for salvation, living and instantiating Christ's kingdom here on earth. So does it undermine a Catholic view of society? Of course, because it conceives of everything as individual economic units. Let's take the family as next. the family exists in a capitalistic system as also individual economic units. You don't view the family as an end in itself, but as another means, right? Why do we think the birth rate in all of the Western countries has plummeted? Because the ultimate end of the family, the ultimate end is we are all individuals pursuing our individual pleasures and means. So the birth rate is going to go down because kids are expensive and they're becoming more and more expensive. And so it necessarily goes against a family conception. Likewise with the endless war against abortion and contraception, why was it so easily accepted? Because abortion fits in with financial fulfillment. Kids are expensive. I don't want to have this kid. I will abort it because it goes against my individual fulfillment. This is not a debate advocating for socialism. It's a debate with its primary, trying to shift the primary end from capitalism, which is an individual conception, to a Catholic view, in which it is conceiving of man and his final end as being the primary. So this is before, if we accuse of, this side is socialist, we're on the socialist Bernie side, we're feeling the burn. We're not, we're feeling the burn of the sacred heart of Jesus, right? And the burn is living out of poverty, trying to be detached from this world. Capitalism says you can do nothing else but be attached, right? Necessarily. And so for all of these reasons, the Catholic view of society is in no way compatible with American capitalism, and it completely convinces American Catholics, you can't live the Catholic system. It's impossible. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a rather blistering speech from Mr. Denley. We'd like to welcome up from the opposing side, the first presenter of this evening, Ms. Eileen Casillas. You have 6 minutes.
Great, thank you. So to begin, I want to draw one distinction. There is a difference between American capitalism, which is listed in our motion, and true unbridled capitalism. True unbridled capitalism is essentially a greedy, profit-seeking cycle that has no regard for individual and the consequences, as long as the companies are retaining capital. And obviously this leads to a lot of issues, such as like excessive consumerism and materialism, which I would like to argue that American capitalism does not. And also, the reason that the economic model that we have is not per se Catholic is because our country was founded on certain principles and freedom, and one of these was religious liberty. And obviously that is one of the main reasons why we do not have a Catholic theocracy in this country. So, to begin, there are many benefits to American capitalism. To begin, for example, if you are a normal wage earner working a 9-to-5 job, you are given, if you appropriately utilize your time, you are able to do 3 things. A, have leisure, which is the basis of culture. B, have time for family and friends, which builds a strong community and promotes a Catholic view of society. And C, the most important of all, prayer. And this relies on us as people to be able to do it. It is not the responsibility of our economic system to promote this within us. Another main point is, for example, if for some unfortunate reason the business that you're working for ends up failing, you are able to market yourself in order to shift to another business and get another job in which the income from which you are providing your labor allows you to continue working and provide for your family. Another point along with this is the freedom of what you do with your capital. Obviously, with that freedom, Pope Paul VI talks about the importance of economic institutions and structures and how and how responsible freedom allows us to grow as people. And that is a very important point because the American capitalist economic model allows us 2 options. The option to choose virtue and put Christ at the center by providing fair wages and appropriate hours to our workers, or choosing the vicious cycle of greed. And within that, what would our virtue be if it was not tested in a system such as this? So, with that, also, American capitalism provides equality of opportunity, cooperation. Equality of opportunity is provided because any individual is able, using their specific talents and gifts, to start up their own business and create a large scope within it and influence the culture. And I would say that the reason that our culture is not as Catholic as it should be is because we have not taken up that responsibility to fulfill that, even though we have been given the opportunity to do so. And lastly with that, the way that I would like to wrap up this is that American capitalism essentially promotes our freedom, equality of opportunity, and cooperation in an optimistic system, which utilizes the person's individual gifts and talents, and ultimately that supports the Catholic view of society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Casillas. To the few brave souls who have decided to throw their weight with a timid snap or maybe even a here, I encourage you, please make your voices be known. Thank you very much. With that energy and excitement, I'd like to welcome our second speaker for the Affirming side, Ms. Bethany Brzezinski.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Praise be Jesus Christ. I want to start by reiterating what Mr. Dunley said about socialism and capitalism being a false dichotomy. So capitalism's origin, actually, or its whole view of the human person, is this more or less the same view as socialism. It reduces the person to material ends. It says we're made for things here on earth and not things in eternity. And capitalism and socialism are actually relatively new ideas. Capitalism, like this idea of a free market and Adam Smith and the invisible hand and all that kind of stuff, that's new stuff. It came out of the school of liberalism after the Enlightenment. And this is at the point in Western society when we've rejected God. And so we should kind of question that. We should say, is that good if it's coming out of a society that's rejected God? And so liberalism is built on this idea that the human person is inherently individualistic and selfish. And so I have my own desires, I live for my desires, and I have to kind of placate and put desires to the side so that we can all kind of live in harmony and get along. That's not the Catholic view of the human person, which I'll talk a little bit more in a minute. And so this idea of appetites. So we have these appetites, and according to capitalism, we should be free to fulfill them. And by pursuing and fulfilling them, that's supposed to be good because it creates more wealth. And sure, the whole system works, it creates lots of wealth. But we should question that. Our Lord in the gospel doesn't say, go out and get rich. He says the opposite. He says, if you want to be perfect, go sell what you have and give to the poor. And another thing about capitalism is it not only says, so it claims to say, you have these desires and you have the freedom to fulfill them if you want to. But it actually isn't just let you do what you want with those desires. Businesses will go out and manipulate and create, through marketing, create desires you never knew you had. Okay, so that's capitalism. Sounds kind of scary, sounds kind of poisonous. What is the Catholic view of the human person? The Catholic view of the human person sees that we have these desires, but recognizes because of original sin and the fall, these desires can't just be taken as is. They have to be reformed, they have to be trained. You aren't meant to live in lust and avarice and doing whatever you please. You're meant to live poverty, chastity, and obedience. And so our Lord comes and he gives us the cross. He says, I call you to the cross. I don't call you to follow after your desires. I call you to live in the cross. I call you to live in communion. Capitalism says that you must be selfish for it to work. The church says you're called for communion. And communion is something that's inherently selfless. It's giving of yourself, putting aside your desires for the good of the other. As the Second Vatican Council, John Paul II, the Second Vatican Council says, man does not find himself unless he makes a sincere and disinterested gift of self. And so you're made for communion. The early church really lived this out in regards to money and wealth. And we see in the Gospels that they would pool their resources together and live in a small community, not socialism on a big community, but they would live in this small community of really looking out for and taking care of each other. Capitalism is inherently antithetical to that. It says that I should be interested solely in myself, and by being interested in myself and my own needs, I'm feeding the system and letting the invisible hand work its magic. That's not good. It's not good. Our desires should be reformed and reordered so that we can live in imitation of Christ, who pours himself out for us on the cross. And so the early church began trying to live that model. If you study the ascetics in the early church, who really show us how to live the spiritual life, their sole goal is to learn to deny themselves, to put aside their desires, to detach themselves from the things of this world, so that they can live in communion with God and neighbor. And so capitalism, which promotes the vice of avarice, is totally antithetical to living the gospel. And so Christ calls us to poverty, chastity, and obedience. And that isn't just something for religious, off in a monastery. That's for all of us. The gospel is for all of us. We should be living in poverty, chastity, and obedience in our own lives, and reforming our desires towards Christ. And so when we live our vocations,
1 minute.
by living our vocations, we're actually working totally against what capitalism expects of us. Parents with 10 children aren't going to be going out and indulging themselves on whatever they want to buy. They're not going to be able to feed the market that way. They actually have to live frugally, learn to have less and buy less to help provide for their children. And by doing that, they actually are properly ordering the goods around them, which is what our Lord has entrusted to us by giving us material things, for us to properly order those things. You notice how large families don't waste a lot. They tend to use their resources well. But if you have a lot of things, you tend to waste things more. You say, oh, I have another car. I don't need to take care of this car and really use these things that I have well. Capitalism says you should buy more and waste more. It promotes this, what we see here in America, this culture of consumerism and wastefulness. And not only do we have it towards things, we have it towards people. We're wasteful towards people. And so in conclusion, I would say, with repeating the Lord's words, and say, what does it profit a man if he gain the whole world but lose his soul? And so I hope that we can imitate St. Francis in his love of needy poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Linsky. Finally, for their opening speeches, we'd like to welcome to the floor Professor Joseph Zork. Professor Zork, you have 6 minutes.
Like the first speaker, I agree, we do not live in a Catholic country. But unlike him, I don't want to live in a Catholic country. I want to live in a country where I'm free to be Catholic. And I think this country is probably the best place on earth to live as a Catholic. If you were going to start an economy that you wanted to work well, the first thing you would have to do is provide a system of property rights. Who was the first person to recognize this fact? It was Thomas Aquinas, soon theologian. What Aquinas said there was that private property was an extension of natural rights. Commerce, the division of labor were all extensions of natural rights. 700 years later, John Paul II, in his encyclical on economics, Centesimus Annus, argued that, pointed out that it would seem, I quote him, it would seem that on the basis of nations and international relations, the free market is the best way to organize resources to satisfy wants. So, and of course, what we have here, why did John Paul say that? John Paul grew up under communism. He knew that he couldn't live his faith in a communist country. No one can. You'd be killed for your faith. In this country, you are free to live out your faith. And what happens in a capitalist country is that you have the freedom. And of course, under capitalism, businesses are not evil. We try to paint a picture here that they are evil. They are not evil. In a capitalist system, in a competitive system, if you are a business, you have to meet the needs of your consumers. If you don't, your consumers won't buy your product and you'll be out of business. If you are not efficient in your business, the capital markets will punish you. They will lower your stock price. And some corporate raider will come around and take over your business and run it more efficiently. So we have that. And of course, our Catholic faith is one that and of course, capitalism is a system of hope. That is, in our society, we can always hope that things are better, that things will become better in the future. And we can look to the technological innovations that make our lives easier to live. 3G is coming, and 3G will allow cars to communicate with one another, and so they won't run into one another anymore, and fewer of us will be killed in automobile accidents. That's a good thing, and that's what capitalist societies do. Also, capitalism tends to solve problems. The economic report of the president came out recently, and it brought out some interesting points. In 2010, the unemployment rate was 10%. Today, it's below 4%. Under the Obama administration, we had a very slow recovery from the economic downturn 2007, 2009. But what happened a couple of years ago is that we made some changes. Today, we find that poverty is much lower than it was a few years ago. There are fewer people on welfare. There are fewer people on disability. Inequality has become better. We measure in economics, we measure inequality with what's called a Gini coefficient, and that Gini coefficient has been declining in recent years. What happened was that the Congress 2 years ago reduced the corporate income tax, from 39% to 21%, and what happened was that the businesses started investing. They started hiring more people, and as a result, the economy has done much better. I have an iPhone in my car, and on the way home tonight, I will connect that iPhone to my radio, my XM radio, which Capitalism gave me. And I have an app on that phone. It's called Rebuttal. And instead of listening to 1970s rock and roll, as I usually do, I will open that app and I will pray the rosary on the way here. That's what capitalism has done for me. Capitalism has made it easier for me to be a Catholic because I have all these things given to me by a big company, Apple, which was started in Steve Jobs' garage.
Thank you very much, Professor Zorn. Before we move into the open floor period, we will allow each of the presenters to take one question. We'll begin with Mr. Denley. If you have a question for Mr. Denley, I encourage you to please stand with your right hand raised and be recognized, and to frame your question shortly and directly, if you will. Gentleman on the bottom left, is very nice.
Hi, Mr. Denley. I was wondering what the Catholic view of the economic model would look like. Would it look like somewhere in between socialism and capitalism? Because I'm just really confused by the idea of what that would look like.
Replaces the ends of both. The ends of both have man as a material thing, and necessarily in competition. The Catholic view is outside of that. It looks completely different than just capitalism. An equivocation in capitalism that was spoken before is that it is the free market. It's not. It's a system which tells you that individual fulfillment is the highest thing, right? Free markets have existed far before that. Capitalism is the system that tells you what the free market is for. The Catholic system looks nothing like that, but has a free market.
Could you give one example of what...
There's no
follow-up question. No follow-up. Thank you very much. The next presenter to take the question will be Ms. Casillas. I'd like to remind you, if you are standing up in the mezzanine and would like to ask a question or give a speech, please make your way down to the ground floor where you will be recognized. Are there any questions for Ms. Casillas? The gentleman on the right is recognized.
Yeah, you said that American
Please
capitalism...
wait for the mic, if you don't mind.
You said that American capitalism is distinct from unbridled capitalism. And then you explained what unbridled capitalism was. Then you didn't say how American capitalism is distinct from that. So maybe you could explain that?
Yeah, so one of the main differences is that there are limits on American capitalism. For example, that's the reason we have labor unions. So that's just a quick answer to that.
Short and to the point. A wonderful response, Ms. Casillas. The next presenter to take a question will be Ms. Brzezinski. Is there a question for Mr. Brzezinski in the house? No daring souls to ask Mr. Brzezinski a question. The young woman in the back. Thank you for waiting for the mic.
So what would you say to, because you mentioned poverty, chastity, and obedience, and also the rich young, like when Jesus tells the rich young ruler that he, to sell everything, how would you respond to like the poverty, chastity, and obedience that's just specifically religious who are doing that, and that's not a blanket thing for everybody, and also that he was talking to the rich young ruler specifically, not making a general statement to like all his followers necessarily?
Yeah, so we're all called to live it in some sense within our lives because we need to be living detachment from material things. But some of us, especially those in the married state, need to have material things to feed their babies or whatever the case may be. And so stuff is a means, it's not an end. It's a means towards living detachment and living for Jesus Christ.
Thank you, Mr. Brzezinski, for your response. We'll take one final question before moving into the open floor period. Does anyone have a question for Professor Zorn? The gentleman in the back is recognized.
My question is, at what cost? You know, you said American capitalism upholds the American ideals of liberty and our freedom and our rights, and that, like, you know, our rights and the rights of all our desires, and that our technology is good, that because this technology allows us to master nature. So, but at what cost is my question?
Zero cost. I think that you're making the point that as we become wealthier, and we become more savvy with technology, we become less of a Catholic. I don't think there is any problem. I think that we can become Catholic in any place in the future. We look at things today. We are far richer than any generation ever in the United States. But there are 70 million Catholics in the country. So if your argument makes sense, there shouldn't be any Catholics because they've all been lured by all this wealth and left the church. They haven't.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zorn. We'll then move into the open floor period of the debate. This is for all of you who have been brave enough to snap or stomp or hiss if you really feel that there, to get up and present your case in front of the open floor. We'll have 5 minutes to speak, and we may not use notes. Are there any speeches for the open forum who'd like to get us started? The chair would like to recognize Mr. Cirilla in the back. You have 5 minutes to speak.
First of all, I would like to apologize. I know you might not believe me, but I never come to debates dressed like this. I thought, oh, I'm just going to come for the opening speeches, you know, have a good time, and then leave, do some homework. But after those opening speeches, I got fired up, so. Got some jumbled thoughts, going to try to organize them. But I sort of have 3 main points, I guess. The first point is sort of talking about the difference between American capitalism and capitalism, like Ms. Casillas talked about. The second point is talking about a key element of capitalism that hasn't been mentioned yet. And then finally, just what conclusions we can draw from this. So, first of all, so our motion today, as we can see, is American capitalism undermines the Catholic view of society. And as has been mentioned by both sides, there seems to be a difference between American capitalism and capitalism. But just to flesh that out a little bit, there's such a difference. Just to flesh that out a bit, as the affirming side of the motion has mentioned, unbridled capitalism has actually been condemned by the Catholic Church, and it is an economic system that is totally not in line with the Catholic Church's social ideas. And that is because it promotes sort of an unbridled gathering of wealth. It doesn't respect human rights, and it has nothing to do with respect to the human person. But is laissez-faire capitalism what America has today? I mean, I think the answer is obviously not, right? Like when our debates about our economy are whether or not the minimum wage should be $8 an hour or $15 an hour, I mean, the debate are centered around how much we should limit how much people can earn, right? We're not about our economy is not saying, oh well, employers can pay workers as little as they want, right? No, we're saying there has to be a minimum wage because we have to have a certain level of human decency. Or I mean, there are plenty of other examples of how American capitalism is nothing like unbridled capitalism. We have so many rules and regulations for the ways that people can spend their money, the way people can use their money, the way that employees can be treated. So these two are actually, they're very, very different in a key way. But another point that I have is what is a key element of capitalism that hasn't been mentioned, right? And that is free will. Capitalism, unlike almost any other economic system, puts a priority on man's free will to do what he wants with his own property. And this is very important, right? Because as Catholics, we believe that we have been created with free will, right? We're not sort of commanded to do something and unable to choose, right? That's the whole point of original sin, right? That Adam and Eve, they ate the apple because they had free will to sin. So, and while I'm not saying that a government system should encourage sin, is that what American capitalism does? I don't think so. I think American capitalism allows us to do what we want with our own money without encouraging us to sin. It's what it says. You worked hard, you earned your money, you started your company, you grew it to be enormous, and now you can do what you want with that money. And so I guess in conclusion, I think we have to ask ourselves, from what we understand about the Catholic view of society, does a system that puts regulations on the way that employers can treat their employees and say, no, you have to provide them with health care, right? Or you have to provide them with the means to not just give them 1 penny an hour, right? Is that a view that undermines the Catholic view of society? I think over the past 100, 200 years, we've seen a great shift in the way that the American economy looks. From the Gilded Age of the late 19th century, where you sort of have these big businesses paying their workers, pennies a day or pennies a week even, to a sort of system where, as much as I'm not the biggest fan of FDR, I think that in the mid-20th century, America sort of saw a shift to see that we have to actually treat the lower classes of society with respect. And I think that is sort of the way the American economy has shifted over time. Shows that as Americans, we actually are concerned with the way that our workers are treated. And I think even in the political debates today, we don't see Donald Trump advocating for laissez-faire capitalism. We just see him advocating against the socialistic system we see from somebody like Bernie Sanders. So anyway, in conclusion, I think that because American capitalism is so different from laissez-faire capitalism, and because capitalism has an emphasis on the free will of the individual to decide what they want to do with their own property. I don't think it undermines the Catholic view of society, but I think that you can have a capitalistic system like America does that at minimum at least is in line with the Catholic view of society. So thank you.
Mr. Cirilli, will you take
Yes, I'll take it.
Is there a question for Mr. Cirilli? The gentleman in blue is recognized.
Yes, I'd like to talk about a point that you mentioned about free will.
Please make a question rather than...
Oh, yeah. And it's getting to the question essentially, and that free will is important in everything. And as Professor Zork pointed out, there's under 4% unemployment. But what about those millions of people that have unemployment in this capitalistic society? They have to rely on the state, they have to become slaves of the state, and their free will is taken away. So, how would you respond to that in a capitalistic society?
Well, the element of capitalism I was referring to when I said free will is the free will to do what you want with the goods that you have, with your own private property. And I think in other economic systems, you see a sort of either the government is going to take your property and do what it will with it, or that you don't have property at all. So I think that's a slight, when I was saying free will, I meant the free will to do with your private property. No.
Thank you very much for your speech. The chair is quite honored to recognize Dr. Andrew Jones for his speech. Dr. Jones, you can have 5 minutes.
Thank you. So where I want to start is maybe with a sort of an Augustinian point, which is that the externals of a society, of a commonwealth, are not separate from the loves that they pursue. They flow from the loves that they pursue. So it's not a question of what system do we implement, and then within that system, whether or not Catholicism can function. That doesn't make sense. Rather, it's what externals are built when people are pursuing Catholicism, when they are pursuing the fine Lent. What results? That's a more profound question. So if we ask the question, let's imagine a sort of thought experiment. What if we were a society of saints, all of us? Would we have capitalism? Would that be the system? Would we have the stock market, do you think? A whole society of Mother Teresa's. Is this what we would do? Well, then what's going on? What are we pursuing that this is what we have? Right? That's the question. So, another sort of Augustinian insight then would be that society any given society is a mixture of those who are pursuing the true end, the city of God, and those who are pursuing wealth, pleasure, power, the city of man. Right? And there's a conflict waging between them. And the structures, the external structures of society that are built out of one love or the other are the matter of the debates and the politics that are going on. Right? Which system are we going to have? So if we're going to talk about capitalism, we need to give it some positive content. Capitalism is not merely the absence of regulation. 1,000 years ago, there was no state regulation and no capitalism. Right? Now we have an immense amount of regulation and capitalism. Right? So what's the positive content? And it seems to me it's something like capitalism is a state of affairs where people behave as self-interested, wealth-maximizing individuals, and their social bonds are constituted by contracts of mutual gain that are defended by the law. Something like that. So where that state of affairs reigns, that's where capitalism is. But that means that you know that's not the state of affairs that reigns everywhere. We have friends, we have families, we have a church, and we're not operating within that state of affairs. So the point then is that capitalism isn't a system that covers everything. It's something that exists this place, and it's growing here, and it's declining here. As we act that way or don't act that way. Right? So a good example would be 100 years ago, there was an immense amount of work that was done in the household, say, everything from growing food to making clothes to cooking food to raising children, that was done in a non-transactional, non-commercial, non-competitive way, in a non-capitalist state of affairs. Right? Over the last 100 years, that has been transitioned mostly to a capitalist state of affairs. Right? Both parents work out of the home, they hire people to mow the lawn, they hire people to raise the kids, they go out to dinner, right? Now, that's not something that happened because of regulations. The government didn't do anything different. But we've become more capitalist. Why? What's changed? Right? So the question I'm going to ask is that state of affairs compatible with a Catholic one? A Catholic vision, a Catholic social vision. And so we have to give that some content. What is it? And I would say that a Catholic state of affairs, social state of affairs, is one in which people behave in a self-giving way, and that their social bonds are constituted by charity. Now, if we see that's where people are Catholic, where they're the city of God, that seems antithetical to the capitalist one, completely incapable of occupying the same social space. So where we're behaving capitalistically, we can't be behaving Catholic. And where we're behaving as a Catholic, we can't be behaving like Catholics. So, the idea, so I guess the fundamental point I want to stop, or not fundamental, at least where I stop, is that the idea of the distinction between the state and freedom, or something like that, where we're free to behave, is missing the point entirely. The whole point is what we pursue with our freedom, which we always have, is what constitutes the state that's over us, the economy that's over us, and the systems. Right? So we're missing the whole argument. We're arguing about policy. That's not what's going on. It's who are we and what are we pursuing. The structures flow out of that.
Dr. Jones, are you interested in taking a question? Oh, sure. Is there a question for Dr. Jones? The gentleman in the back in the Franciscan shirt.
Good evening. My question is can we use capitalism to help pursue with Catholicism? You said Mother Teresa, yes, she did live among the poorest of the poor, but she also received loads and loads of money from donors. So can we use capitalism to help give families jobs who would not be able to have jobs? And can we use capitalism to help others who cannot find help?
Well, it sounds like your real question is, can we use wealth to do those things? Which the answer is obviously yes, right? But that doesn't mean that anything that any means of creating wealth is therefore justified, because it's conceivable you could do something good with it, right? Those don't follow at all. I mean, like a fundamental question I would like to ask is, do we think that more people are saved the more capitalist we become? 30 seconds. I mean, so that form of wealth accumulation, throwing a couple of it back to the poor isn't getting at the problem, right?
Thank you very much, Dr. Jones. Quite impressive to see so many hands willing to follow the speech. I admire your courage, but mine would not be among them. I'd like to welcome the young lady standing in front here to the floor. You have 5 minutes.
Hi, so I actually don't totally love capitalism, but I don't totally love what the other side is also saying. I mean, what I keep hearing is, in history, we had smaller communities where we all pulled in our money 100 years ago. It's not 100 years ago. Things are different. We have a more global society where people are having to interact on a daily basis with money, and in economies, you need some sort of regulation, yes. You need some sort of system in which to do that. And as I've seen so far, the other side hasn't really totally given a whole system that we know is going to work long term. So it just seems to me that we keep going back to way back when, looking back at the good old days, and it doesn't really seem to be matching what we're having to deal with now. And I know that I was supposed to take 5 minutes, but I think I'm finished.
Would you like to take a question?
Sure.
Is there a question for the speaker? Chair, I'd like to recognize Mr. Denley for a question.
You're here. Mr. Aaron Lesser, please use my full title. Thank you. It doesn't seem like the onus is on the affirming side to produce some sort of solution to this, because the notion is just that American capitalism undermines the Catholic view of society. So we just have to show that and not give a solution to the problem.
I suppose, but by saying that it undermines it, how would you be able to fix it from undermining it? I understand that that's not necessarily what we're supposed to prove, but, I mean, where would you go from there? It just seems like you're just kind of ending on a...
Thank you very much for your speech. The chair would like to recognize the gentleman in the back. You're welcome to the floor for our 5-minute speech.
Here.
The first thing I'd like to address is just the American capitalism, right? The distinguishing capitalism versus American capitalism. So we've already agreed that unbridled capitalism is condemned by the church. And I'm surprised to see that no one has referenced Pope Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum encyclical. This issue and condemns unbridled capitalism. Mr. Dimley, when asked about capitalism, the difference between capitalism and the free market, he's like, oh, well, capitalism, essentially has these motives, contains the motives to pursue wealth like for the sake of greed. I would argue, well, for one, I believe it is Marx who coined the term capitalism, and really, when we say American capitalism, we just mean free market principles. And we already see that American capitalism has regulations, essentially where the government will intervene when it violates human rights. But I would argue, like, economic theory does not in and of itself contain motives, like these moral motives that the negative has been, but people contain motives, right? So we ask ourselves, like, what are the motives that are valid to have when interacting as Catholics in an economic environment? And Pope Leo XIII suggests the principle of subsidiarity. So we have the that Professor Zorek expressed from the greatest doctor of the church by Thomas Aquinas. So life, liberty, and property. So we have a right to property. Yes, we can willingly relinquish the ability to have property for a higher good of living in poverty, but it is not in and of itself bad. In fact, we have a human right to it. So the principle of subsidiarity suggests that basically, if you're a family, you have it, like in your father trying to provide for your family, right? You have an obligation, a moral obligation even, to provide for your family first, but for the good of, let's say, your community, your state, and then ultimately your country. So there is an inherent, as far as, obviously there's an excess in wealth that you seek to acquire, but rather that you do need to seek out wealth in the sense for the preservation of life, which is foundational for our human dignity, for all of it, right? So the principle of subsidiarity allows us to, it means of self-preservation, preserving life, not just your own, but also in self-giving love for your family, that you're able to make these exchanges that not only benefit yourself, as in your family, but also others, because everyone is acting in essentially self-preservation of life for each other. And Professor Zorek has found great knowledge in his economics class that I'm blessed to be in. And we see that if life is this means that we're trying to preserve, right? Unbridled capitalism, yes, we agree with, but ultimately, it seems it's worked the best in comparing with the options of socialism and communism, which we see Pope John Paul II has condemned, Pope Leo XIII has condemned socialism, and so that American capitalism being regulated, where human dignity is preserved, that the output has been more life. Life has been preserved, like through free market principles. Today, like lifespan are longer than ever. Just like thriving, and essentially, if you think of it, if you try to, let's be utilitarian for a second, right? Measure the total output of goods, even more goods.
1 minute.
If there's more life, you could say there's more potential, more opportunity for people to be morally good, more opportunity to evangelize, more opportunity to convert others, to share in that communal life through baptism in Christ, right? So I suggest that unbridled American, regulated capitalism to where it doesn't interfere with human dignity based on the principles of subsidiarity which Pope Leo XIII has exonerated as a good thing. It's foundational. It's the whole reason why socialism is wrong, why communism is wrong, and that it does not undermine the Catholic view of society, and rather is built on it. It's built on these natural law principles, built on the great wisdom of human dignity that Thomas Aquinas has provided us, and especially Pope Leo XIII, being a 20th century pope, has addressed it firsthand. So thank you. I'm done.
Is there a question from the speaker? Mr. Gonzalez, you're welcome to a question.
You attribute the quote of life-living property to Thomas Aquinas. I'm pretty sure that was a lie.
No. So, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness is right in our Declaration of Independence, which is kind of redundant because, say, pursuit of happiness and liberty, essentially the same thing. So, Thomas Aquinas, basically our natural rights that he suggests is life, liberty, property. Now, liberty, there is a distinction being the freedom to pursue the moral good. So, we don't have intrinsic rights to do moral evils, but
that was long.
Well, you can also, the same principles are.
Thank you for your speech. I've been informed by those who now do the means of production that there are, in fact, a surplus of material wealth in the back of the form of nourishment. If you find yourself in need of spiritual enlightenment, you'll find it on the floor. If you find yourself in need of physical nourishment, that'll be in the back, and it is provided on the basis of charity, not contractual. Please help yourself. The chairman would like to welcome Mr. Denley the Lesser to the floor for his speech.
Here, here! I don't know much about much, but I know a little bit about a little bit. Here, here, here! So hopefully I can add a little bit to this conversation. I didn't really follow the last speech very well, but I did follow a little bit. So I wanted to start by saying, where do we actually get capitalism from? Capitalism is not some pie-in-the-sky idea that some people just kind of created. It was born out of Enlightenment principles, yes. It wasn't born out of Thomas Aquinas. Please don't try to make that argument. It was born out of Enlightenment principles, though. And who used it? The Enlightenment principles, largely in England. King Henry VIII. The Oxen King. He gave a bunch of money. He gave a fifth of money that he stole from the church to these cronies, to these convicted criminals that he pardoned and gave a bunch of money to. It's called crony capitalism. That is the start of the capitalism system. The system that we kind of inherited. The Enlightenment ideals that empowered King Henry VIII, that empowered all this other stuff, was anti-Catholic, was anti-church, and was born, and that is where capitalism was born out of. So, if you want to argue about principles, get your facts straight in the first place, where they actually come from. And then secondly, the history of capitalism. Now on to the issue of American capitalism. American capitalism that has all these laws and regulations. I don't care about the laws and regulations on capitalism. I don't care. Because the principle itself, the system itself, is the problem. The system which says, as Dr. Jones was saying earlier, promotes the city of man as the end, not the city of God. The principle is, you are meant for this world and for the amount of pleasure that you can get out of it. Those are the principles. They remove the soul, the goods of the soul. So when you introduce Catholicism into a capitalist society, yeah, you can have good capitalists. You can have people that are going to use their wealth for good means, or for good ends. Wealth as the means for good ends. Capitalism replaces wealth as the means with the end. There is no end further than wealth. Wealth is the end. So essentially, I think there needs to be a discussion about what are the actual ends of capitalism? What are the goals of capitalism beyond wealth? If you're going to introduce your Catholic ideals into the capitalist system, we understand that you're a Catholic and that you have ends that are beyond wealth, but we're saying that inbred in the system of capitalism is the end of wealth and not the end of the city of God. There's my speech.
Here, here! Is there a question for Mr. Denley?
for the saying here. I have a question. Did you say that that Henry VIII was inspired by Enlightenment principles? Because you did. Henry VIII died before the Enlightenment started, just to get the facts. The Enlightenment roughly starts with Descartes 1600, about half a century later.
In virtue of the fact that Dr. Cirilla far outranks me, I will allow his breach of conduct. Please do not follow his example as he becomes a
I will also, in light of his position, take that correction. That is exactly right.
The display of humility is well matched. Before moving on to the following speeches, we are going to welcome one 3-minute speech from the affirming side and the opposing side. Following that, we'll move right into the lightning round. There'll be plenty of time to make speeches, but in the interest of allowing all those who would like to speak, we're going to move quickly to the lightning round to get as many speeches as possible. We'd like to welcome first from the affirming side, a quick speech from Mr. Denley.
Here, here.
You guys, 3 minutes.
You get a Denley double dunk. This is exciting. I'd like to speak first on the idea of unbridled capitalism. Unbridled capitalism is just capitalism with all its logic followed through. What is keeping back someone from screwing over employees? Okay, morality and legislation, right? Those are the only two means by which those who have the capital can be limited in their use with those under it. Is legislation, can they sue me or whatever? Or like in the case of Mr. Robb, which I explained, got in front of $1 million, he had only recourse to legal means or moral means. The Catholic conception of it is legality is not the only thing, right? Crony capitalism is the state working with those who already have capital. Those who already have capital control how the laws get written, right? Because they are the ones who already have the means. And so they're necessarily going to make laws that are going to be in favor against their competition, right? If I'm competing against Mr. Denley the Lesser in our different companies, right? And I don't want to take family, it's business, it's just not personal, it's not family, it's business. And I go at him, let's say I have enough money to influence politicians in a particular way. We're fighting over a piece of land to develop an industry. Well, I can use the means of the state against Mr. Denley the Lesser and use that. In the Catholic conception of that the legal recourse and the moral recourse is with the recourse of what Catholic morality actually looks like. And like Christ says, if you have something against your brother, bring 2 witnesses, and if he still won't listen to them, bring it to the church. And if you won't listen to the church, let him be as a heathen to you. Because that is the, capitalism says you're necessarily, I'm going to, necessarily go against Mr. Denley, the Lesser. But in this conception, in the Catholic conception of that, it doesn't have to be in competition. You will be outside of the church, you'll be excommunicated because of your use of capital. I'd like to make 30 seconds is exciting. The quote, I don't want to live in a Catholic country. I want to live in a country where I'm free to be a Catholic. That denies the social reign of Christ. That is completely in Syllabus of Errors number 55. The church, the error is that the church must be separate from the state and the state separate from the church. This is an error condemned as heresy. The social reign of Christ demands that all aspects of life, our economics, our political system, everything be transformed in the image of the human divine incarnation of Christ here on earth. Let me conclude. This separation is absurd. And I'd like to say this, the capitalistic, it completely undermines the Catholic view of society. We've swallowed the pill of money. We've worshipped mammon. We no longer worship God.
We'd like to welcome back to the floor Dr. Zork for a 3-minute speech.
Did I mishear that, or was I just a heretic? Maybe I should call Monsignor and tell him. But the idea of unfettered capitalism is a straw man. There's never been a place like that, and I suspect there will be. If you can find a place like that, I'd like to move there. Because I'd start a hedge fund and start a church. I'd like to tell you a couple of personal things that happened to me in the last week. Last Thursday afternoon, I was in the backyard feeding the birds. And I discovered that I was out of mealworms. Now that's a tragedy for somebody who feeds birds. And so I went to Rural King to buy some mealworms. Now, I went to Rural King, and I had $5 in my pocket. And Rural King had mealworms. I didn't want my $5. I wanted mealworms. Rural King didn't want the mealworms. They wanted my $5. So we made an exchange, and we're both happy. That's what capitalism is. As I was being checked out with my mealworms, the lady who checked me out gave me the most beautiful smile. I mean, she was an older lady, not as old as I am, but she was old. And I smiled back at her. That's what capitalism does. It was William James who said that when we smile, we're happy. Not people are happy when we smile. When we smile, we're happy when we smile. And another thing, the other day, my wife asked me to put some things down the garbage disposal. I have a comparative advantage of that in my house. That's an economic concept our president doesn't understand. But I put this stuff down the garbage disposal, and the garbage disposal got clogged, and the water came up into the sink. And I thought, oh God, what am I going to do? And God said, go to your computer and find out how to unclog the garbage disposal.
30 seconds.
So I did. I went to YouTube and I put in unclogging garbage disposals, and there was a video there, and in 5 minutes, my garbage disposal was unclogged.
You're here!
That's what capitalism does. Unclog the garbage disposal.
Thank you very much, Professor Zorri. If you have information as to places in which Dr. Zorri could start his hedge fund or would like to donate mealworms, there's information www.franciscan.edu. We'll now be moving into the lightning round portion of the debate. If you would like to present a speech, stand with your right hand. We'll have 2 minutes and no question. We would like to recognize to the floor the gentleman in the FUS hat. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. So, the main problem I have with the affirming side's argument is that you're assuming that the premise of capitalism is like immorality, like that the only thing that matters is like getting wealth, getting rich, and that's it. A point Mr. Dentley made was that we need to not have just going for wealth. We need to have morality. We don't need to just have regulation on capitalism. We have morality. And I don't think capitalism implies that we can't have morality or that we can't have moral legislation. I think that's the point. Capitalism is a free market, and it's based on freedom. So it's not a set system where we have these certain principles and you have to go and attain wealth and then that's it. Like capitalism is a free market. People can do what they want, but at the same time, there's still room to to legislate morality. So I don't understand why you're kind of limiting capitalism to just being an immoral, just promoting immorality. It's promoting freedom, and so that's why I think the affirming side's argument is kind of weak.
Thank you for your speech. Would you ever like to recognize the gentleman in the back, standing with his hand in his coat? The one who turned around, yes. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Well, personally, I love capitalism. I think that
the question some people have been posing is, what is the end goal of capitalism? What is the thing we're seeking with capitalism? And I think that it is so that a billionaire can buy a yacht. And I think that's a great thing. I think he should get a Ferrari. I think he should go to Disneyland. I think he should take his whole extended family to Disneyland. You know why? Because when he buys that Ferrari, there are people like you and me who are getting money from their, I don't know, the Ferrari company, whatever. The more that billionaire buys, the more he indulges in his so-called greed or love for the luxuries that life has, the luxuries that God has given us to enjoy. The more us, the people, benefit from that. It's very simple. I have a small landscaping business I run in Valparaiso, Indiana, next to kind of the Chicago area. I wouldn't have enough money to be at this school right now and work for very wealthy doctors who don't want to mow their own lawn, because why should they? I mean, if they were walking around in a sackcloth and, you know, dedicated to the virtue of labor, I'd be out of the job, and I wouldn't be here right now. I wouldn't have a chance to one day be that doctor that pays some kid to mow my lawn and give him a chance. The more this notion that we need to, you know, be striving for something spiritual is completely, it's innate, it's not part of the discussion here. The essence of capitalism and a free market and an economy has to do with material goods, which are innately good, given to us by God. And the more we pursue that, the more we will benefit our brothers and sisters in Christ. Thank you. Thank you for your speech. The chair would like to recognize Dr. Cirilla.
Thanks.
You have 2 minutes.
I'll just say really quickly that in my mind there's a real fundamental issue that's probably hit on, and sorry it's repeating, you know, things. Who owns capital? The people or some other entity? That's it. That's the issue. It's either the private person owns it or somehow some larger kind of hired up body's gonna own it. And that could be okay in certain circumstances, but I think it seems to me the potential for greed is there in capitalism. John Paul II recognizes that, Chet Testament says, but it's not an intrinsically evil system. I think it was Marco Rubio gave a talk at Catholic U recently on common good capitalism and all that, right? So it can be ordered well, I think. But the big issue for those of us my age and older who have living memories of the Soviet Union
1 minute.
is that it's dangerous for the state to govern capital either at all or too much. Very dangerous. I mean, it leads to genocide, that kind of danger.
Thank you very much. We will have 4 or 5 more lightning round speeches for a total of perhaps 10 minutes. The chair would like to recognize this gentleman in the blue shirt as well. You have 2 minutes.
All right. So one problem that I've been having with this debate is that I haven't really heard any very good definitions of capitalism. I think capitalism, from what I understand, is an economic system that didn't exist until roughly like 1800 or so, give or take like 50 or 100 years, I'm not quite sure. But basically, as far as I understand it, it didn't exist in the Middle Ages, but it exists now. So how did this shift actually happen? Basically, the people who owned most property went from the gilded people, the craftsmen, to a few rich people who didn't just like work with their own hands. They had a lot of workers who worked in their factories for them. I don't think that it's adequate to give the definition that I've kind of been hearing a little bit from the affirming side, which is which mixes in the end, but I don't really like the definition from the other side, which is where it just defines it as private property, because private property and freedom were in the Middle Ages, and but capitalism, as far as I know, wasn't. I think also it's helpful to go back to what the Catechism says about this. It says the church has rejected totalitarian and atheistic ideologies like socialism and communism, but then it says right after, in the practice of capitalism, individualism, and an economy which bases all decisions on the law of the market. That's all I have to say.
Here. Thank you for your speech. Chair would like to recognize Mr. Donzelli in the back.
Here. Okay, I want to go to something Dr. Zork said in his opening speech real quick. And we live in a system of hope, right? Right? It's a system of hope, a system of efficiency, yeah? A system where if you're not efficient and you do anything other than follow the ends of the material goods, then you're not so efficient and somebody else buys your industry and you're on the streets. So hopeful, right? You have to do what you need to do to get things, and if you do anything else, you're not efficient and, well, you gotta go. And so I'm so hopeful for the rest of my life, by the way. It's amazing. So I want to talk real quick about something, which is just money, capital. What the heck is money or capital? It's this thing we use on the rail, on the daily, and rarely think about it. And I want to propose that capital is, in a sense, a valuing of a person's work, a person's labor.
1 minute.
Now, if you imagine, I'm going to construct this real quick. I have a business. Mr. Dunley here is my employee, and he makes me a thing, a toy car. You're a philosophy major too, yeah? He makes me a thing, and I pay him $2, right? I value his work at $2, and then I take that thing and sell it to Dr. Zork for $4. Inherently, in that system of capitalism, I'm undervaluing his work, his time, his life, his dignity. Because, for example, $2, $4, the value of the thing that I paid him $2 is valued at $4. It's an inherent undervaluing of his work. Here.
Please conclude.
Workers of the world unite!
Thank you very much for your speech. Chair would like to recognize the gentleman who will define the Judge Succo. You have 2 minutes.
So as Professor Zork mentioned, the goal of companies is to meet the needs of the consumer. But there are 3 examples in American capitalism where this simply is not the case. For example, with Facebook, did you know that Facebook actively tries to addict you to its platform? This is true of the vast majority of technology. In fact, as Professor Zork brought up Apple, the Apple iPhone is also addictive. That's why it's so successful. Another example with Apple is that they intentionally made it that their battery would not last as long so that you would buy more Apple iPhones. When I was in Austria the other semester, I remember meeting this elderly Wisconsinite on the train, and he was very, very enthusiastic about Austrian culture. There are 2 things that he brought up. First of all, Austrian homes. In Austria, they build their homes to last. The fact of the matter is that here in America, we build things cheaply because the economy, American capitalism is not able to look to the long term. It only sees the short term. He also brought up the Austrian clothes. For example, shoes here in America, we do not get our shoes resold anymore. Why? When we did get our shoes resold, they lasted much longer. We made them out of real leather, right? So why this lack of quality in American goods? It's because of American capitalism. So I'd like to ask you, if American capitalism is that bad at reaching efficiency, at really meeting the goods of the consumer, do you really trust American capitalism to really do what's morally good?
Thank you very much for your speech. The chair would like to recognize the young woman in the front who offers a 2-minute speech.
So, I have had my run-ins with capitalism quite a bit. I have been a minimum wage retail worker for 2 winter breaks running. It sucks. Do you know why? They don't pay you a living wage. They make you work in conditions where people are mean to you all of the time. If you are not doing something every 5 seconds, they will criticize you. Why aren't you working? Why? Well, you're making me work an 8-hour shift during Christmas break. People are mean. People will come up to the register and be like, why don't you know everything there is to know about Kohl's? I'm just like, well, I just came home from school. I want to make a little money so I can buy Christmas presents for my family. They're expensive. And why are they so expensive? I don't know. But all I know is, in capitalism, there is also a need to make these cheaper. They outsource things to China. They outsource things to all kinds of other countries. I don't know how to leave it at that. But my point is, working in retail is an example because they demand so much of you but pay you so little. They undervalue your work. They treat you like dirt, especially the customers. And quite frankly, that is not a society that I would like to live in. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your speech. The chair would like to recognize the gentleman blonde standing up against the mezzanine wall. You're welcome to a 2-minute speech.
Well, there was a question earlier about what is the cost of capitalism. And I would agree with the affirming side that the cost of capitalism, well, it undermines the Catholic idea of the culture. But I would just address, I agree about the point of the waste, the state that capitalism has come to, the waste in culture, and also capitalism, it is intrinsically immoral. It is amoral, and it allows for things such as a industry of sex trafficking and pornography and prostitution. And it also, I would also like to make the point of the idea that material prosperity equals happiness, which it does not. And I would also conclude that just look at the state of our culture. We are more materially, wealthy than ever. And we are less happy than ever. We are spiritually impoverished. We are weak, and our technology has made us stupid. That's all I have to say.
Speakers, thank you for the speech. We'd like to welcome next to the floor Mr. Five standing in the back.
Here, here! Yeah!
Hello, everybody. If I had $1 for everything wrong with capitalism, I probably wouldn't be complaining about it. And a couple of things. One is a small fear, and that fear is, I think we tend to think in dichotomies in America. So one of the reasons we tend to hold on so tightly to this capitalistic system is because we think the only alternative is something akin to socialism or communism on the other side. And we don't see anything in the middle. And so while I only have 2 minutes and I really can't go into an alternative, I would propose that there is one. And in the interest of furthering sort of the education of this event tonight, I would encourage you guys to look into what's called distributism. It's a really, really interesting idea in the middle ground between capitalism and something like socialism. So look at that. Another thing is just 30 seconds. Anecdotally, so when we all leave here, a lot of us are going to have accrued a lot of debt. And this is sort of to Nation's point, Mr. Zrilla's point before, where he said we have all this freedom, but so many of us are going to live in debt from the system for so long after this, with loans, and then the people with the capital are going to be able to to take advantage, of basically us needing their money and getting more capital off of that. And so we're not really free in that sense. We don't have all of this freedom, and I would say that's somewhat made up, somewhat of a myth. It's the ideal of how capitalism ought to be, but it's not really what happens. So those are just a couple things I wanted to point out.
Attaboy, Josh!
The speaker is thanked for his speech. We would like to welcome forward next the gentleman in the 38 AD church. You are welcome to a 2-minute speech.
I have a debate on capitalism, for capitalism. No, I did capitalism. I do have a very good point exactly. But when I want to speak about against capitalism, bad because it does undermine the passive view of society. The passive circumstances support that,
Hear, hear!
Well, I support.
You're 1 minute if you'd like. I made many good points. Is that all? The speaker is thanked for his time.
Hear, hear!
The chair would like to next welcome up Ms. Cirilla to the front row. Ms. Cirilla, you have 2 minutes.
So, if we lived in a perfect world, if we lived in a country where we're all Catholic, yada yada, but we don't. And that's not the way that the world is right now. So, as of now, American capitalism is the best system under which we can freely practice, exercise, Christian charity with our wealth, under which we would not have. Which we would not have under any other system.
Speakers, thank you for your time. The chairman is somewhat intimidated by the well-dressed gentleman in the back, but we'd like to welcome him up. Yes, you, sir. You're welcome forward to this.
Hi, I would like to say first of all, I'm very nervous and I'm sweating profusely. And English is my third language, so do not judge my accent. I would like to say that, first of all, I do not know a lot about capitalism, and I do not know the roots of it, so do not judge my, what I say tonight, like too hard, okay? But I would like to say that our freedom is capitalism. And please don't just wait, okay? Our freedom is capitalism, in a way. And the way that it's capitalism is that God is not controlling us. Sorry, Josh, you're a smart man, but sorry to go against what you said. That capitalism, in its true sense, in its definition, is not like we don't have true freedom and we can do whatever we want, really, because we have student debts. But capitalism is like, God gives you freedom, right? You can do whatever you want, however many cents, whenever you want. But what matters is the virtue, and you cultivate that. 1 minute. And capitalism gives you the chance to do that. It's about the person and the person's virtue. And the businessmen that do things wrong, or the battery, which I don't think is true, by the way. The battery stuff, it's not, they don't do that. They do that because they're people, and they have a bad sense of being, you know? It's not because of capitalism. Capitalism is supposed to be good. In America, country of freedom, land of the free, home of the brave. I'm from Haiti, I don't really know. But, yeah, capitalism is supposed to be true freedom, like the freedom that God gives us. Of course, we're human and we'll make mistakes, and that is the roots that of all the problems of capitalism. The human error. It's human error and human mistakes in the human mind. That is a problem of capitalism.
Please conclude.
Thank you.
And also, the speaker is thanked for his time. We would like to welcome to the floor next, Mr. Shepard, standing against the wall. Mr. Shepard, you're welcome to a 2-minute speech.
Okay, so I'm just going to be real quick on this. I just want to say, first of all, I'm sorry, but the affirming signs are wrong. Because look, I'm not, all I have to say is, you're speaking in ideals. The Catholic worldview is an ideal, and if we were all perfect, we would be living in a great society. We all love each other. There is nothing running rampant. There are terrible things that are happening to the most innocent of us, of all, babies. None of that stuff would be happening, but it is, not because because of American capitalism. It's just an idea that we implemented to make this country what it is today. Maybe the country's not perfect, but I would love to say that compared to every other country in this world, I think we're getting the best to the most perfect as possible. Also, I'm sorry, but I just kind of think that this whole argument that, well, American capitalism is all about greed and all about this stuff, it's just, I don't agree with it. I think it's more that we're afraid to go out like Jehovah's Witnesses, like all these people that are preaching the gospel over and over again. We're so afraid to actually go out and live out our faith, be real Catholics, actually do what the apostles did. So we want to just attack the ideals that are governing our country rather than taking it into our own hands. Actually, going out on SEM retreats, mission trips, all these things that we could be doing, but instead we choose to just sit around and talk about all the terrible things that are going on. And we rather put that at the top of our list as what's wrong, rather than actually go out and do something about it.
Another galvanizing speech by Mr. Shepard. Before I'd like to welcome, just need to follow that up, Mr. David Hahn, who himself is known for rather electrifying speeches.
Here, here.
Like our former friend, I'm also not from a well-developed country. I'm from Ohio. So please be charitable with me. English is not my first language. First is the ballet. So, and I too know not very much about capitalism, but I do know a little bit about virtues and vices. And what I just wanted to point out briefly was, while capitalism may not be intrinsically disordered, it does seem to enable one to act or live according to the vice, right, of greed, avarice. It seems to lend itself, but on the flip side, something akin to socialism is going to lend itself to envy. Okay, so it's going to lend itself to envy in that you desire what the other person has, so jealousy, but also wish them not to possess it. Okay, you see large amounts of this in the lower classes of America, harshly resenting, right, the upper tier. Now, is it great what the upper tier have done? Is it good that they live according to greed? I mean, I'm not going to judge their hearts. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're successful. I would like to address what Mr. Denselmi said briefly and just say, you know, America, land of hope, right? It's going to be great. Now, there seems to be the obvious bell curve of wealth distribution, and it seems to have been around since basically forever. The best system that I've seen sort of rationalize this in a human way seems to be the medieval system with the class structure and this idea that God gives these gifts and honors the individuals themselves. And it seems that while you can go into capitalism and say, like, I will be successful, like my cousin, you can also go into the society like Mr. Denselmi and I have, trying to start a business and be like, well darn, I guess we're not making any money. Anyways, if you guys want any leather goods, let me say.
The speaker is thanked for his time. We'd like to welcome next to the floor the gentleman in the white sweater. You're welcome to a 2-minute speech.
Good evening, everyone. Blessed be God. A lot of good points tonight, but one really important thing that I want to mention is a lot of people have been mentioning the insistence in Catholic social teaching upon the insistence of the right to private property. This is really important. But also, integrally important to this whole discussion is, if you read Rerum Novarum by Leo XIII, first he says that private property is inherent right, but that's not just so we can do whatever we want with it. Right after that, he says, equally important as the right to private property is as much property as we acquire, that gives us more of a duty. To whom much is given, much is expected. When we die, we're going to have to give an account for everything that we own. Everything that we own is not for us, it's for the sake of the gospel. This, Mr. Denley brought up at the very beginning, the story of Ananias and Sapphira. What happened to those who did not give? So everyone was giving all their money to the apostles, and then Ananias and Sapphira were like, oh, we're only going to give half. Keep the rest for us. What happened was St. Peter said, cursed be you, and then they died immediately. We are going to be held accountable, and I got to say, the gentleman back here in the green, what you were saying about we should just buy all these yachts and Ferraris, that is absurd. That is not what a Catholic should be doing. We are going to, when we die, we're going to be held accountable, and if we abuse our money in that way, and the problem with this whole debate is that capitalism, a lot of people have said they're saying it's amoral. Okay, well, it's not like inherently saying greed, but the thing is, it's not going to be encouraging virtue either. Capitalism is not encouraging virtue, and it's just making us want it. You can either use all your money for good, or you can use it for bad. But the problem with it is that it implies that economics is amoral. The Catholic teaching says that economics is completely intertwined with morality. This is what the Protestant Reformation wanted us to see: is that it's just pay the loan, and then so that your morality doesn't matter. But Catholic's teaching says we need to have all of our money, we're going to be rendering an account for it. And that's why there's problems with the American capitalist system. Thank you.
We'll take 2 more lightning round speeches before the night is over. We move on to the vote. And first of those, we would like to welcome the gentleman in the back of the tie. You're welcome to a 2-minute speech.
As the dissenting side wants to talk about practical arguments, I will settle for that. Practically speaking, capitalism leads to socialism, and there's no way to get around that. The reason for this is, as Dr. Zorch said, capitalism puts stress on efficiency. Efficiency comes from the division of labor and specialization of work. This is inherently opposed to self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency is the basis of all stability. Because of this, capitalism necessarily leads to an unstable government, or unstable economic system, for every single person, for essentially every employee. Every employee does not have self-sufficiency because they are so overly specialized, they cannot support themselves outside of their very narrow role in society. So because of this, because there is no self-sufficiency in capitalism, employees turn to the government, citizens turn to the government for self-sufficiency.
1 minute.
They turn to the government for welfare, for handouts, all other things. This leads to socialism. I'm not doing a very good job defending this, I think, but I think you only need to look to history to see that socialism immediately followed upon the invention of capitalism, and that every capitalist society in the West is now moving to socialism, and arguably would have been socialist 50 years ago if it was not for the USSR destroying the idealistic image of socialism. Yeah. I am anti-capitalist because I am anti-socialist.
Here, here. The speaker is thanked for his time. We would like to welcome the final speech of the night, Mr. Michael Eric.
Here, here.
If you were unable to give a speech or a second speech tonight, I apologize. There will be more debates to come. Thank you for your time. Mr. Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you all for coming out tonight. I apologize that I had to step out for a moment, so I unfortunately missed several points. I'm sure we're all good. Hey, don't miss me. I was praying a rosary, so watch it. But one thing I'd like to talk about is something that was brought up earlier. I forget which speaker brought it up, but the ends of our society. And one thing, especially that we have to think about when talking about the relationship between an economic system and the religion, Catholicism, is where do those ends differ? And obviously, we spoke that the end of the religion of Catholicism is to get as many people as possible into eternal glorification with God, that being heaven. What is the end of capitalism? Well, truth be told, I'm not quite sure. When I was in high school, I considered myself a libertarian. Now I see that idealistic young man as a far cry from where I am now, having taken courses in philosophy, in theology, in history, and yes, a class taught by Professor Zork in macroeconomics. And I've kind of come across one thing.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The soul is the real economic unit that matters. It's the person, it's the self. And this self is constantly deprived in a society that focuses so much on capital, specifically human capital. Like someone, I believe Mr. Denley earlier mentioned in his opening speech that the capitalist society sees humans as not as people, not as souls, but as economic units to be pushed around and moved around in whichever way is most efficient to the powers that be. I won't get into who that is because I probably have 30 seconds left. But the point at the end of this very short argument is that capitalism and Catholicism have two entirely different ends. And we have to understand that nothing that we acquire, no material possession that we have here on earth will ever compare to the glorification that we will receive in heaven. Every Walmart t-shirt, every Apple product, every water bottle is but a drop in an endless sea of material possessions that pales in comparison to the eternal glorification of God. And I know this is very simplistic, but it's, at the end of the day, the truth. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Here, here!
Thank you, Mr. Erickson. Thank you to all of those who participated in our open floor period, whether during the long speeches or short speeches. Before we conclude with the vote tonight, we're going to welcome one speaker from the affirming and the opposing side to give a 1 minute and 30-second spiel as to why you, the audience, should vote for their side. We will first welcome the speaker from the affirming side, Mr. Denley. You have 1 minute and 30 seconds to speak to all this.
You've heard too much of me. I'm going to tell one story. In New York City back in the 1890s, when Rockefeller and the Gilded Age, they were building new St. Patrick's right across from Rockefeller's fantastic plaza. And he had built this enormous, to combat it, he had built this enormous statue of Atlas holding the universe on his back. And in reply, the Cardinal Archbishop put a small statue up on the facade they were building of the infinite pride, holding the universe in his hand. To the charge of idealism on our side, congratulations for your brave defense of the demonic standard quo, in which we're okay with all of this, pursuits of, hell and fulfillment of desire. Why not be idealists? Why not believe that grace actually works? Why not believe that when you receive Eucharist and you receive Christ, you can instantiate the incarnation in the world? Why not believe that grace works? Should we be idealists? Yes, because we are Catholics who believe in grace and in the transforming of the world.
Attaboy, Alex.
Thank you very much, Mr. Denley. And finally, before we move on to the vote this evening, we'd like to welcome Ms. Casillas. You have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Yeah, so one of the main things I would like to do is reaffirm the point that the economic system is an amoral structure. It is we who have a personal responsibility and freedom to make it what it needs to be. And with that, with our capital, we are able to fund things like Catholic universities, Catholic parishes, and missions, which promote the Catholic view of society. And with that, we can also better ourselves, our families, and our communities through the responsible use of our capital. So I want you guys to keep that point in mind. And also, it is not a negative thing to want to have those improvements in our lives. It is something that is natural. It is a human desire to better ourselves and our community and our surroundings. And that is something that we should lean into, not stray away from.
45 seconds.
Thank you.
The speaker is thankful for her time. Briefly, before we move into the vote, I'd like to make you aware of a few more events that we as the Veritas Society are putting on this semester. Coming up next on March 29th, the end of Lent, we'll be hosting our charity debate, which was attended by over 350 people last year. We do hope you can make it. It should be a wonderful time. Please stay tuned on our social media to find what the motion of the debate will be. Following that, on April 18th, we'll be hosting a masquerade fall fundraiser. For those of you who are somewhat disappointed with the rowdy dances that are otherwise socially at University, come to a cultural night of fall and dance. See you there. Finally, on April 19th, we will be hosting a joint debate with Christendom College, who will be sending some of their Chester Bellhop presenters to Franciscan to debate the death penalty right here at the Gentile Gallery on April 19th. There's one final housekeeping note. There will, in fact, be cheese and crackers served just after the vote. If you'd like to stay around around and discuss in small groups, which are presenters and those of you who are around. Additionally, the Household Daughters Design will be hosting a coffee house in the atrium if you would like to join us for that. Announcements aside, the motion tonight stands. This House believes that American capitalism undermines the Catholic view of society. You have the option to affirm the motion, to oppose the motion, and to abstain from voting. We'll first count those who would like to affirm the motion. If you affirm the motion, please stand with your right hand raised.
Nothing to lose but our chains.
You may be seated. If you would like to oppose the motion, please stand with your right hand raised. And finally, regrettably, for those of you who forgot your spines on the way in and would like to oppose the motion, stay in the motion. Stay with the motion. My apologies. Please stand, and we will record your names on the
Forgot their spines. Forgot their spines.
Results have been tallied. The motion, this House believes that American capitalism undermines the Catholic view of society, has received 10 abstentions, 44 oppositions, and with the closest victory in Veritas Society history, 45.